Hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. I'm Dan Stilgate, marketing manager at Blend, and joined again, he's back. Phil Vallander, co-founder at Blend, is in the studio. He's enjoyed a nice break in Dubai. I've dragged him back into the podcast studio here to share some insight with you all. In this episode, we're talking about the marketing metrics that actually matter and the ones that you really do need to pay attention to. And I suppose we want to help you simplify how you measure marketing, because there's so much complexity out there in the marketing metric world, and really help you make smarter decisions about your strategy. We're going to cover off things like why so many of us are overwhelmed with too many metrics but still can't answer the questions that are actually required. The core metrics that really do matter and you should start obsessing over. The metrics that you should stop obsessing over. How to measure brand impact will be an interesting one to touch on. Balancing marketing intuition with data to drive decisions, and the problem with metric overwhelm and the whole analysis paralysis thing. So anyway, Phil, good to have you back in the studio.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be back. We've got a lot to get through there, and this is a really interesting topic. It always is, but it's neither new to marketers or new to this podcast. We've talked about it before. I'm interested to ask you, for the audience's benefit, what triggered putting this on the schedule now? What happened to make you want to talk about this now?
This podcast is brought to you by Blend. We're a B2B website and demand generation agency. We work with ambitious businesses just like yours to create and execute effective demand generation strategies that drive pipeline for your business. We also recognize that your website is the most important asset you have in marketing. So we specialize in building scalable websites on HubSpot that convert the demand that you've created. If you want to find out more about our services and see real results that we've generated for businesses, visit blendb2b.com. Yeah, it's funny because I do feel like we talk about metrics and measurement a lot,
it's not
don't
new.
we? Yeah, we do. But had a really interesting conversation on Friday with a marketing leader, and just the same kind of things and the same questions and problems and challenges keep coming up around metrics, around measurement, like, struggling to get more investment for the things that they truly believe in, but are struggling to justify in terms of data and measurement. And like, there's this overwhelm of data. They feel like they've got access to some of the right things, some of the wrong things, maybe not looking in the right place to justify these investments, and like putting the right metrics in front of the right people in order to do that. Like, just this whole kind of digest around metrics and how to position different metrics to share different insights and make strategic decisions. And I was just like, yeah, we just need to talk about this again.
Yeah.
It's an issue that is still here. It's not going away, and hopefully we can just bring a bit more insight again.
Yeah, I find in conversations like that quite often the successes are there, but they're only discovered in conversations like that, where you bring fresh perspectives to the data and look at it in different ways and help people identify what the signals are within that, morass of data that they have that shows them that actually things are working really well, or for whatever reason they only come out in those conversations, and therefore they're not part of the reporting language of that business, that department. So often conversations on the topic are where people realize that measurement has missed the success they're having. And yeah, marketers can do a phenomenal they can have a phenomenal impact if they're able to highlight the things that are driving the performance of the business in the way that they want the business to perform. So there's change needed in many cases, and yeah, it's a perennial issue that needs discussing again.
Yeah, this is a bit of a rare one actually, where the business was performing really well, like in terms of revenue, in terms of profits, record-breaking results, but there was a real struggle tying marketing investment and effort back to that. So when it comes round to budgeting again, it's like marketing want this because, they know themselves that they drove a huge proportion of this impact, but then the business can't see that and can't measure it. So it's like got goals up here, but budget's down here, and the two aren't matching up.
Yeah, really common. So where are we going to start? What's the first point on the agenda?
Well, I think like a classic blog, where a well-written blog, we jump straight into it and get the lay of the land out there in terms of the core metrics that actually matter. What did you call them before we came on? The big daddies?
Yeah, I think I said big daddies.
So the big daddy metrics that
Yeah.
actually matter. First one for me, customer acquisition costs.
Yeah, yeah,
That is a fundamental metric that reveals, the true cost of generating a customer. And that's going to drive so many decisions in the business about budgeting. What is our cost to acquire a new customer? And you can break that down in terms of the whole go-to-market or just marketing cost by, customers, basically. How many customers do we need to get? Do we want to get? And there you go. Like, you have what you need in terms of budget to acquire the level of customers that you want.
yeah, absolutely. And it kind of is as simple as that at the end of the day, right? The role of marketing is to help the business acquire customers, and therefore the cost that it takes to do that currently is the best sort of stake in the ground for your future planning and budgeting.
So I suppose we're working back from here, right? I've started at customer acquisition costs, so it's kind of like the end of the journey.
It's the very end of the journey and the beginning of the thought process,
Yes.
I suppose. Because ultimately, if you're not acquiring customers that you can connect to your marketing investments, then your marketing investments are potentially going to waste, right? So it has the effect of aligning everything to the business goal, the business KPI, which is ultimately going to be a revenue and a pipeline KPI. You need a certain amount of revenue to meet goals. You will have an average customer value, so therefore you know how many customers you need to acquire. You will know from your previous marketing spend what your cost per customer is, and therefore you can work through and say, well, to acquire this much revenue next year, taking into account retention, churn, expansion, we need this much net new, for example, and you'll know, hopefully, from your historic data what your close rate from pipeline is, so you'll know how much pipeline you need to generate. You'll probably have a sense of how many opportunities that looks like based on historic values, and you can start to work your way back up through the other core metrics that matter most. So I think probably after customer acquisition cost, what comes next in my mind, it's probably those ratios, those win rates. What's the close rate from pipeline to customer? What's the conversion rate from high intent lead to opportunity? And then what's the conversion rate from, now you can argue this a number of ways, but our belief is that from website visitor to high intent lead is the most important sort of marketing metric if you consider pipeline performance to be sales and marketing. That conversion rate on your website is one of the next most important metrics to track and measure.
Yeah. And then for me, it's the whole thing around split funnel analysis and weaving self-reported attribution into that too. So understanding your conversion rates by different sources. So what's our conversion rate for events? What's our conversion rates for inbound leads to the websites? What's our conversion rate for partnership acquired leads? And then, you can go a step further by looking deeply into the website leads and saying, okay, so those that we acquire inbound through the website, let's break it down by self-reported attribution and say, what are the highest converting lead sources through the website? Is it social? Is it search? Is it word of mouth? Probably referrals, all of those kind of things.
Yeah. For all channels of marketing investment, there will be most likely differing performance metrics, conversion rates from lead acquired through that channel at that investment into pipeline. There'll be a different win rate from pipeline to revenue, and there'll be a different cost per opportunity and customer based on what you spend on generating those leads through that channel. So, events might come at a very high cost per lead, but have a phenomenally high close rate, whereas other channels might look far more favorable when it comes to cost per lead, but track it through to revenue and you've got a far higher cost per customer. But you've got to look at all of that as the sort of mix.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't want to go all in on one because of the risks that that come with that, but you do need to have an understanding of the way the different channels perform, because ultimately you're deciding to invest your budget there, so you should be getting a ROI that you're happy with and aware of it.
Yeah. And, ROI, like you've just mentioned, is probably the other multiple we missed out there. Like keeping track consistently of your ROI multiple on either particular marketing investments, like events, ad spend. Well, then we get into return on ad spend, I suppose. But that's probably, an important one too. But yeah, ROI is probably a good one to start including like at a quarterly level too, to track the trend there as well.
Yeah. If I really, really think about it, I think that the cost per customer broken down by channel of investment is really the crux of it, because this is what's going to guide you to make the best use of your money, the best use of your budget, and help you to know where to optimize or pull out. Because if you've got a channel that is spending your cash and not driving return on investment, well, you've got a question to ask yourself, which is like, am I sensible? Probably not. Continuing to spend this money here if I can't optimize it to the point where it produces positive ROI. Is there a universal definition of how businesses should measure ROI, or is that dependent on sales cycle, customer lifetime, the business itself, or is there a rule of thumb that we can share with people there? The most important thing is that you do it consistently, right? Like whatever your measurement is, like 1 year revenue, 3 year revenue, whatever your approach to it is, you have to stick to it in order to get meaningful data back. Because you never know how long a customer will stay for you, you never truly accurately know lifetime value, you can't use that as your measure of ROI and tell yourself it's 100% accurate. But if you decide to take an average of the customer lifetime and its value to you, and you use that consistently as your measure of ROI, then you are going to get comparability across your channels. And that's the most important thing here, that you can compare channels effectively against each other for their value to you as your business. So no one rule for it, but a consistent approach is the best approach.
Yeah, every business will define probably how they track ROI slightly differently. It might be, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, like you said. They might factor in LTV. They might not. Like it depends really, and it's a lot of the time it depends based on industry and what you're selling to, and sales cycle length, and all of those things that go into it. Like you say, the most important thing is that you are measuring something consistently that's well defined, and the definition doesn't keep changing every time you want to measure ROI.
Yeah.
Like, it's consistent, and you can see the trends because the data is reported in the same way again and again. So, Phil, we've covered off the things that you absolutely should obsess over. Marketers should be thinking about CAC regularly. They should be obsessing over their split funnel analysis and what channels are truly driving measurable impact and ROI for the business.
Couldn't agree more.
But would just love to quickly cover off what other things they should stop obsessing over. Because I know marketers that obsess over, company page followers on LinkedIn. They obsess over like site audit scores on SEO tools, just things that really don't move the needle in terms of business success. They might have a place to play when you're trying to optimize a channel and a strategy, but I think we should just quickly cover off. These are things that you should not be thinking about whilst you're having a shower, whilst you're walking the dog and having dinner. All these things, they shouldn't be occupying your mind consistently.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty, and to your point, nearly every metric that we could think of has a place, has a role to play, is worth considering at some point in time, but too often they're the focal point of marketers and they shouldn't be. So some of the most obvious ones that just come up, recurringly are things like website bounce rate, time on page, to some extent, leads generated when we're talking about the old-fashioned lead generation mechanism. When it comes to off the website, social content, the focus on engagement metrics, likes, clicks, impressions, at the expense of bigger picture stuff that is related to pipeline. These are all things that tend to get obsessed about, but are neither high impact when it comes to buyer behavior, nor do you have much control over them, truth be told. Like, most of the things that we see being obsessed over that aren't important, you can't even really influence the way you would like to. So those are some. There's one big elephant in the room, which we can perhaps talk about in a moment, which is attribution data.
Yeah.
But before we get on to that, any others that come to your mind?
I would throw website traffic in there when it lacks context. So when you're just spitting website traffic metrics everywhere without context into how it's having an impact further down the funnel, it's meaningless, because you don't know if that's the right kind of website traffic. You don't know if they're like true qualified buyers that are researching your product and converting on your website. So, you know, if I increase website traffic, great. What does that do for us?
Yeah, okay. So I take your point. It's a good one that like quantity in many areas on its own or minus quality is worthless to you. So it's quite easy to generate a lot of website traffic, but it not be quality, it not be buyers, ICPs coming to your website. So I think there's an important point about context there, which is website traffic, I think, is an important metric. It's a leading indicator of what you can expect later in the funnel, and I would expect marketers to track it, but obsess over it. No, you don't need to obsess over it. Just need to check it every now and then to make sure it's going in the right direction and understand it ultimately. And yeah, I think if you obsess over website traffic in isolation, then you're perhaps missing vital elements of what's important to your buyer and to your business.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen other really weird things reported at actually high levels in businesses, particularly around like site audit scores from like SEMrush and Ahrefs, which is just crazy to me that anybody apart from the people focused on the website and SEO are even talking about those things. Like, don't worry yourself.
Yeah, targeting a specific score from either an SEO platform or Core Web Vitals, a specific score is largely ineffective in terms of creating buyer, affinity and trust and pipeline at the end of the day. So no, that would be misguided.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Things like backlinks, the number of backlinks, it's like targeting a specific number doesn't really matter. We know that we need to get, good recognition in terms of backlinks in order to drive more visibility in search and better rankings and then more qualified traffic and all that. But don't stress over that metric.
Yeah, absolutely. Have it available to you when you need it, but don't stress over it. CTA clicks, there's a whole host of them, isn't there? Yeah. Attribution is a whole category of data, and we left it out of that list. But I think on balance, I've seen attribution data do more harm than good.
Yeah.
In my experience of it, and in the discourse that takes place. So I think I'm on the side of saying that attribution data is definitely something you should not obsess about. And more so, if you are obsessing about it, it could be harming your performance as opposed to helping it. It could be misguiding your investments, your energy, what other metrics you prioritize and obsess around, and moving you further away from your buyer and your business goals. So for me, it's one to nix.
Without a doubt.
Right.
Without a doubt. Totally agree on that. Multi-touch attribution, I think, is a dangerous game for businesses when making sensible investment choices, because it will tell you that pretty much everything is working and everything is having an impact on the buyer journey to take them all the way from this kind of unknown person into a customer. Because the buyer will have a lot of touch points with your business, but multi-touch attribution won't tell you which ones were truly the most effective to them.
It has no way of knowing.
Exactly. And the other issue with multi-touch attribution is it requires you to have that contact data at a stage before you need it, and a stage before they will naturally reveal it to you when they convert on your website, for example, which would then be first touch.
Yes.
And
quite.
And most of the best marketing just generates first touch contacts because they're totally invisible to us before they reveal themselves as high intent leads on our website that all of a sudden have come out of nowhere. They weren't in our CRM. They were never leads. We never knew they even existed. And now they want to buy from us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that problem gets exacerbated when high intent leads get bundled with low intent leads as MQLs, attribution data applied to the
Yeah.
sort of whole cohort, and then used to inform which campaigns, tactics, and channels are working. And it's based on nothing.
Yep.
So a Redditor called it astrology for marketers, and I really liked it because I thought it did sort of call out just how sort of baseless
Yeah.
it is. So yeah, get away from that one if you can.
I think most marketers will be perfectly fine off of a first touch attribution model, because that is the point where the best buyers reveal themselves to you, and you can gather enough information through self-reported attribution, through qualitative insights, through the progression down the funnel to actually make sensible decisions that will improve ROI.
Somebody I respect on LinkedIn actually recently sort of criticized self-reported attribution for being inaccurate, like as in not being 100% accurate. And I have to say they're right.
Yep.
But then what is 100% accurate in marketing? I don't think there's anything really that is 100% accurate. And I know from experience, as do you, that you can gather insights that not only correlate with what you see in your other data, in your pipeline, in conversations and in sales, but like really do reveal true buyer behavior. So while it isn't a completely 100% accurate data point, and it does have to be cross-referenced with other things and common sense applied, it's an incredibly effective way, and it's better than software attribution in terms of deciding how you spend your money at this point in time.
Yeah, like the trouble I have with people like that is they're very quick to say what's wrong with something and the issues with something. And they're totally right. You know, self-reported attribution can be biased to the most recent thing that that occurred with a buyer and your brand, you know, that most recent interaction. But okay, what's the alternative then?
Right.
What's better,
No,
right?
well, indeed.
People rarely have a better alternative to that. And, you know, they are quick to point out the flaws of something, but are very slow, and often it never happens, to actually point out a better way of doing it.
I'm all for using self-reported attribution, warts and all, given what it's shown us so far about our buyer.
So brand is another thing I want to talk about, because it's a whole nother kettle of fish when it comes to measurement, and really the problem and struggle when it comes to measurement. And this kind of comes back to my intro around how I was having the chat with this marketing leader around more investment needed in brand, you know, and there are a lot of leading indicators that can tell you if a brand campaign or brand efforts and marketing revolved around brand is kind of having an impact, or at least a leading impact. But being able to justify that from an ROI and like a direct attributable way is really, really hard when you compare it to something like performance marketing, which, you know, slap a UTM on something, get a direct response lead from a campaign, really, really easy to measure what we got for a particular investment from that. Brand just is a whole different ballgame when it comes to measurement.
Yeah, it's a popular topic at the moment, I think, because the landscape is changing and people are starting to sort of identify that the strength of their brand is having a profound impact on the performance in the face of other challenges. So there's definitely a sort of rising tide of discussion around brand. For me, I think that actually a lot of demand generation marketing is brand, in the sense that good demand gen marketing puts your message, puts your point of view, puts your opinion, puts your offering out in front of your ICP in a way that is neither measurable nor expecting them to reveal themselves to you in return. So you do away, you're throwing away a lot of the measurability that was possible when everybody was gung-ho about performance marketing, you know, because you know it's the right thing to do, but you're now lacking that granular detail that you had before. So we've talked about the ways that you can sort of focus on KPIs and metrics that not only matter, but are positively influenced when you do B2B marketing in a non-performance based way. But is it right to say that there are brand investments that go even beyond demand generation, even beyond an ungated piece of content as opposed to a gated piece of content, even beyond a link in a social post versus no link, where you're not asking for action or behavior back? There are brand investments that go even beyond that, right? Where the only way to measure or see the impact is to look at it through the lens you're describing, where you correlate the costs of those investments with the lift or change in certain metrics that you can say are highly correlated to us investing in our brand in that way. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, for sure. And there are other that's one big way. You know, people look at like Lyft and do actual studies in depth around, you know, how particular brand activity can be tied to lifting pipeline and like closed one and things like that. But I think you made a good point, you know, like around the best B2B marketing now and the best demand generation marketing is brand marketing.
Yeah.
I think the word brand throws people off a little bit,
yeah.
and particularly people that have been in the industry a long time and associate brand with really flashy campaigns like TV ads and billboard ads and like huge aspirational campaigns that are just distributed and, you know, can't ever be measured in no particular way. You know, they're looking at like footfall and the amount of eyes on something, basically. But in my mind, and particularly for businesses up until the enterprise point, brand marketing is just good marketing, because you're basically centering everything you do around buyer preferences and buyer behavior that have now evolved. Like, it's not about direct responses. It's not about performance marketing. It's about getting your message in front of a wide audience in a like freely consumable way that educates them, that builds affinity with them, that ultimately puts your brand at the forefront of their mind when a buying trigger occurs.
Yeah, okay.
But I did see something on LinkedIn from Kyle Lacey, who is CMO at Jellyfish, and I'd just say go and check out his LinkedIn profile, because he's got an awesome resource on there about how you kind of connect brand metrics to business outcomes. And there's a really nice table that, you know, I'd just go and say check it out for yourself, but how you tie brand metrics, so things like increase in branded search traffic, social growth, engagement, customer advocacy, and reviews, how you tie those into financial impact. So, for example, how you take an increase in branded search traffic, but actually, you know, explain this as a lower customer acquisition cost. Because if you can drive quality buyers to your website organically, then of course that's going to drive a lower customer acquisition cost, because you're not paying to acquire that traffic to your website.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd go basically say go and check that out.
Yeah, that's good. It gives you a handle on it, because like so much these days, good effective marketing is not directly measurable in the way that we're used to. But I think ultimately that the goal of lowering cost per customer, I think, is probably one of the most important goals, because if you can achieve that while keeping value of the customer, type of the customer, etc., the same, then you're improving your marketing efficiency all the time. And so there's an array of data points that you can use to sort of help understand what parts of your marketing spend are having that effect. And in particular, like you say, branded search is a good way to identify, to correlate investments in brand that are not connected to the demand gen activity necessarily, where you will actually get self-reported attribution saying that we saw the podcast on LinkedIn, you know, the clip that you posted. We met you at this event. We saw this ad. We found you in Google. You're going to get a good bit of data from demand gen brand there, but supplement it with that, and you start to get a more full picture of the ROI of your investments when you step away from the performance measurability of old.
Yeah. Just before we wrap things up here, there's one kind of visual that I wanted to kind of instill in people, which is when I think about marketing metrics, I kind of think of a pyramid. So at the top, you've got this North Star metric. That might be customer acquisition cost. It might be, marketing sourced revenue. Kind of hate that. It might just be revenue or pipeline. It might be high intent leads from your website. Whatever that North Star metric is, your team and business need to rally around that thing in order to make sure everybody's working towards the same goal. And even if it isn't what all the other functions are working towards, it builds together in order to hit that business North Star goal. Down from that, you've got business level metrics that you need to be aware of and consistently reporting on, but not in the weeds of all the time, because they need a good length of time to play out and show trends over time. So, like your customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, pipeline sources, because all of these kind of things now start to revolve around sales cycle lengths and those kind of things. Then you've got another step down from that, which is, your marketing metrics. So high intent leads, website traffic to high intent lead conversion rate. You might have website sources in there potentially. Then you've got your really granular marketing metrics, so your channel metrics, so LinkedIn ad click-through rates, your site score and things like that, where you're diving deep on a channel,
the atoms of it.
There's layers in there that you need to be aware of in order to know what metrics to use when and where, and what you should really be rallying around and obsessing about.
There's something that I think is interesting is that when we communicate about marketing to other stakeholders, there's usually limited time, limited energy, limited sort of interest in a lot of that. So you need to pick and choose ultimately what it is you're communicating to make your case, demonstrate your impact, your results, and get what you need from the business. So to your point earlier, if you want to have a budget discussion with the CEO or senior management, you're not going to bring LinkedIn ad click-through rate and the SEM rush site score to the table, are you? You want to be talking about those business or top level metrics, KPIs and data points that matter to the people you're talking to and help to contextualize the work you're doing in those important terms. And that's what you've got to bring into those decks. So I've heard quite a few people on LinkedIn in particular, comment on the length of marketing reports and the sort of nonsense that's in them, because they're full of data that's just not of interest, not relevant, and not important to the stakeholders being communicated with. So I think ultimately, particularly when communicating with stakeholders, reports can be simpler, can be shorter, can be more focused on metrics that matter, and you'll get a better result if you do so. And it's a mistake to pad a deck with 85 slides and go slowly through every single one, trying to make your case, if you can't show what pipeline you generated, what revenue you contributed to, and how.
Yeah, and also on that point, before you create that new report, before you invest in that new attribution software, before you try and get that new data point, just stop and think, can I make the decision with the data that I've got? Do I really, really need that new data point in order to make an informed decision here? Most of the time you don't. Most of the time you have enough data. We are swamped in data. You can make good decisions on what you have. You're almost, just clutching at straws to try and get more data in order to prove a point that you already believe.
One more bit of data usually isn't the key to it all for most marketers. They've usually got what they need available to them with some effort at present, because as you say, we're all surrounded by data, probably too much of it.
Cool.
All
right, let's wrap it up there. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye everyone.